morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Can we go to the next slide? I see a few faces there. I wish I could hear you all when I say, good morning, how is everyone? You all can respond back, but in our Zoom life, we can't do that. So I am Lynette Arias. I'm from the University of Washington, and yes, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Research Administration Committee. We don't currently have a federal co-chair, and we hope to change that this year. But we are joined by our faculty liaison, Alice Young, and you will hear from a number of people today. We're going to be a little bit more informal with our session today than the sessions yesterday. We'll have some polls and some back and forth participation. So bear with us as we kind of change speakers back and forth and all of that. Okay, next slide. We're going to start off with a poll. I'm guessing that mostly we have administrators here, but I want to see if we have any faculty or others. So if we can launch that poll. We'll give this just a couple minutes. Sarah, do you have the polls, or does Moises? How's the participation looking?
I have the polls. We are about half of the respondents have sent in their answers.
Okay. This is my way of making sure you're all awake. When we get to 60%, we can. We're going to talk a little bit about how we can engage more faculty. So this is part of the reason that I wanted to see if we do have a few faculty. All right, thank you for joining us, whoever those faculty people are. We can close that and go to the next slide. So for today, we have 90 minutes. I'm guessing that we'll use most of it. We're going to go over some updates about the Research Admin Committee in general and just remind everybody what the Research Admin Committee focuses on. I'm also going to, we're starting to use Thought Exchange more. So I'm going to open up basically an ongoing suggestion box using Thought Exchange for the Research Admin Committee. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. We'll be spotlighting two of our subcommittees with quite a bit more of an update and some questions and dialogue. And then if we get some suggestions within the Thought Exchange, I'll share that at the end and we can open up for questions. So next slide. So this is, you guys that have come to our sessions before have seen this. I just want to remind everybody the focus of the Research Admin Committee. Oops, go back. Again, we're, really the pre-award focus committee. So anything having to do with proposals, awards, contracting, subawards, we've got the clearinghouse. We have two subcommittees that fall under us, or working groups that I put over here in the broader areas, and that's FACT, the Faculty Administrator Collaboration Team, and also our Open Government Team. I'll just give a brief update on them, but they will have more activity in the coming year. So again, just wanted to orient everybody to, if you're new to the topics that we cover in our committee. Next slide. So this is the committee. This is who we're made up of. We've had a couple of changes that the contract subcommittee and expanded clearinghouse will tell you about in their section. But these are all the people in our committee. And actually this year we hope to add a couple, three more at-large committee members. So you'll hear about that. And then I've got Alice Young highlighted here as our faculty liaison. Let's go to the next slide because I'd like to invite her to just say a few words.
Good morning. You can see that Lynette found a much younger picture when she scrubbed it from the web, but I'm delighted that she asked me to talk this morning. I'm a psychologist full professor at Texas Tech. I do have an administrative role, but my representation at FDP is as a faculty member. I've held NIH funding. I've applied for NSF funding, and my research program has been one that has been heavily involved in compliance issues. I've worked with the whole variety of animal subjects, humans and rats, monkeys and such. So I've always been very interested in the role of FDP in reducing faculty burden, especially with respect to the compliance issues and safety issues. But as liaison to the Research Administration Committee, I've gotten a much greater appreciation for the multiple factors that play into the amount of faculty burden we have as we submit grant applications. One of the things I'm interested in from people who are attending this meeting is how can we increase faculty input to the Research Administration Committee? What can we do to encourage faculty representatives from your university, or you, if you're a faculty representative, to serve as a liaison to either the entire Research Administration Committee or to one of the subcommittees? Because this committee is working on things related to proposal burden, budget burden, how these are applied, not only for the federal agencies, but how we apply them within our universities. And so I'm interested in either the chat or in a direct email or in the thought exchange. What are some ideas about what we can do as faculty or as members of this committee to urge faculty to get involved with this committee? And I'm looking for your input. And thank you, Lynette.
Thank you, Alice, very much. Let's go to the next slide. And so what is the Research Admin Committee up to? So additional sessions this week, you'll hear from the Subaward Subcommittee later today. I think after this session, you'll also hear from FACT. So you'll have full sessions for those. Today, you're going to hear from the Contract Subcommittee and the Expanded Clearinghouse. And then I'll give you a couple just brief updates on open government and our proposal initiative before I turn it over. Next slide. So just real quick on that, the open government has completed the letter of credit survey that many of you might have been involved in. And this is obviously a finance audit and costing topic, and we partnered with them, but open government helped put the survey together and monitored it and collected the feedback and analyzed it. We have a final report now, and it's just going through the final approvals and will get published. They also helped with the FAFATA survey, the subaward group. And then they are really gearing up for opening up their subcommittee this year and really creating a data-focused community. And so you will see calls for volunteers from that. We'll also be looking at the volunteer interest survey that went out last year and who indicated that they had interest in the committee or data experience, data management. So this is the administrative data, not scientific data. On the proposal initiative side, so last year we did a lot of information gathering and had several open discussions. We engaged, I think we have 5 faculty members working with us on this initiative. And now we're beginning to approach some federal members, some federal agencies to have some open dialogue and listening sessions about some of the things that we're zeroing in on that we might be able to do in the proposal development and submission stage of the life cycle around business processes, not around the system streamlining, but really around business processes and the potential for getting more flexibilities or reducing burden. We're also, I just really want to call this out, we're trying to do all of the things within the research admin committee and our priorities while still really maintaining an awareness of the priorities of the feds. As you know, there is a lot going on and a lot on their plates, and we're trying to be very thoughtful about not pinging them all the time for a whole bunch of things and really being focused on partnering with them. All right, next slide. So this is where I'm going to open up the thought exchange. Hopefully many of you have used thought exchange up to this point. Later on in January, we're going to do an official formal rollout of thought exchange. But I just wanted to put out there today, while you're paying really close attention to the other speakers, we're going to open up a thought exchange in the background. And if there's anything that comes to your mind that you think we're not covering in the pre-award space that might be something good for us to consider, please enter it in the thought exchange. In a minute, I'll show you the link, and Sarah's going to add the link in the chat and hopefully pin it to the top of the chat. And thought exchange, if you haven't used it, it's just a little tool to walk you through listing the question. It gives a little introduction, and then it allows you to share your thoughts, and it's anonymous, unbiased. So nobody needs to know what institution you're from or who you are or anything like that. And then you share your thoughts, why they're important, and then you can rate other people's thoughts. So again, we're going to start using this quite a bit more, and I want to treat this as an ongoing kind of open suggestion box for the Research Admin Committee. So we'll maintain a link to it on our webpage as well. But this is the question that we want you to think about. And again, just as people are talking, if something comes to your mind, please share it via thought exchange. So next slide. So that is just the link and a little bit of what I just talked through about how we'll keep it open. And Sarah just added the link to the chat. So hopefully you guys can go to that and not have any trouble working through that. And we'll see if we can collect some ideas. If some come in during the session, we'll share them at the end of the session. So with that, I'm going to turn over to the contracts subcommittee, and I believe Jeanette.
Thank you, Lynette. Good morning, FDP members. Wow, we have a large group today. This is awesome. As Lynette mentioned, my name is Janet Hannum Hayes. I am one of the newly mentored co-chairs of the contract subcommittee. As some of you already know, the current subcommittee chairs are Missy Peluso of UPenn. Missy, wave to everyone, please. And of course, Melissa Korf from Harvard. Melissa, if you are out there, wave to everyone as well. Sadly, though, the committee must bid farewell to Melissa in her co-chair role. Melissa's moved on to lend her expertise as co-chair on several other FDP committees, but we are grateful for all of the great work that both she and Missy have been doing in the past with the past subcommittee members. We are extremely grateful to all that you have brought forth to this committee, Melissa, and we're going to miss you. In that same spirit, as I said, both myself and Katie Cook. Katie, can you wave to the crowd just so they see you? Are the newly mentored co-chair. Katie is with Michigan State University. And we have had the pleasure so far of meeting and interacting with many of the returning subcommittee members. So to that end, I'm going to give a brief update because I know many of you have indicated your intent and willingness to continue work on this subcommittee. And again, we are very grateful for that. So to date, the committee is excited to announce that we have 11 continuing committee members and working group volunteers who have expressed their commitment to continue. Thank you, Sarah. who have expressed their commitment to continuing the work of the contract subcommittee. The co-chairs and committee volunteers are going to be focusing on troublesome clause database 2.0 and a list of other initiatives during fiscal year 22, which Katie is going to go in depth a little bit more and tell you all about in a moment. To our contract subcommittee members and volunteers, please know that in our upcoming January 21st subcommittee meeting, we will debrief from this FDP meeting and in turn select and establish the various working groups for the initiatives that we are going to prioritize to work on this year. So again, we're looking forward to working closely with each and every one of you to continue all of this great work. And so to that end, Katie, as I said, we'll talk a little bit more about the troublesome clause database 2.0 and some of the other initiatives that we plan to tackle. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Jana. Appreciate it. And as Jana mentioned, I am the pre-award director at Michigan State University. And Sarah, you can, yep, thank you. You can go to the next slide. And I'm just going to provide a few updates of the different items that the contract subcommittee has been working on, and also some items that we are thinking about working on, and we'll also solicit some ideas. But to start with, one of our main projects, we are working on troublesome clauses 2.0. And so for those of you that attended the May 2021 meeting, there was a presentation to kind of introduce this new database. But to quickly, just to back up for a minute, for those of you who were not aware of this project, the contract subcommittee is working on the next iteration. So the current troublesome clauses database is on the website, and it was developed as a resource to the FDP membership for both research institutions and federal agencies for improving grant and contract negotiations. And the goal was to provide information related to difficult negotiations and to document the collaborative approaches used to expedite the process. And so with that same piece in mind, that's still the goal. We're just trying to make it more of a searchable, more dynamic database with roles and permissions and better reporting. And so I'll touch base with you here as we go through the slide to kind of iterate what we've have been working on. So to kind of start, there's an account life cycle on there. It's very high level, but it's going to be very similar to some of the other FDP databases that you've participated in. You'll get an email and it'll invite you to set up an account. You'll get roles and permissions associated with that. You can log in. You'll be able to search some of the troublesome clauses. You'll be able to flag them, potentially make favorites, troublesome clauses. But you'll be able to not only that, add some, and then they'll be flagged accordingly reviewed. So I think there will be a lot of additional things that you'll be able to do with this database that you were not able to do with the other one. And so at least that's the attempt, and we may have to change things as we go. But we're currently working on a requirements document. Actually, there was this work group within the subcommittee that put together the requirements document, and we're just about to finalize it. It's got use cases for non-members and members. And I think it's really going to be, super comprehensive, which will be nice. Additionally, as this notes, we have a kind of a basic workflow in data collection. So the main fields we're currently looking at is funding agency, instrument type, specific clause, area of concern, reason of concern, negotiation strategy, outcome, and time for the entire process. And I know they're all listed there for you to read, but I think they're really key as to what data fields we're collecting. There will be the choices. A lot of them will be standard, mainly to be able to have some data integrity and be able to report out of the database. As we know, though, there's nuances with these. And so there will be text boxes to indicate that stuff, and then we'll try to standardize some of that to get that reported out too. So we're currently trying to finalize that document. And we do plan on having data definitions within the system also, which I think is very key when you go into something like this. And then also the roles, and I mentioned this already, but the roles with the different permissions, I think for non-members versus members, and then of course within the members, the different accesses will also help maintain the integrity of the database. So next steps. So we are finalizing the requirements document, the data definitions and report specs. And then we're going to be working with the developer to create the new database. So that's kind of the next phase, and we're excited for that. And we'll take some questions on that here shortly, but let's jump to the next slide, Sarah. So quick before we get to questions, if anybody has them or we can address them, wanted to just touch base on some other things that the subcommittee is working on. So we just finalized a FAR, or Federal Acquisition Regulations guidance document. So this is, and we're excited, a work group within the subcommittee worked very hard on this, and we are planning on posting it to the webpage soon. It's just a short document, but it's very detailed, and it provides some guidance for some of the most common problematic clauses we run into. And so, you know, similar to troublesome clauses, but it's a few, and it's kind of a temporary thing that we probably can transfer later, but it's going to be super useful for those who are running into those same problems. So we'll get that posted to the contract subcommittee pretty soon here. We're also continuing to work on the OTA initiatives that we set out last year, and you'll hear more about that soon. And then we have 3 items here. So our subcommittee members have been looking at what different ideas can we work on in the future. We listed 3 of the ideas here. One of them being model language for fundamental research justifications and requests. So basically this is what standard information can you send to your sponsor to document the fundamental nature of the project, and consistently being able to do that we think is important. And so that's kind of one of the ideas of trying to make a document that can be posted that everybody could use as at least a standard template. The other item we've discussed is cybersecurity maturity model certification. As we know, we'll be getting different language associated with this at some point, if we're not already. And you know, how could we monitor that language? Could we also set up standard negotiations for the different levels of CMMC? And so we've kind of been bouncing that around. And last but not least, federal labs in regards to how can we really provide negotiation techniques, standard ways of negotiating with federal labs and language review, and set up some standard things for the membership to look at. And maybe even go a little bit farther in that realm, getting together with some federal labs and trying to discuss a more standard approach to some of these contracts that we get. So those are just 3 of the ideas. So the next 2 parts of this presentation, first is that if you have other ideas associated with things that you'd like the contract subcommittee to take on, please list them in the thought exchange that Sarah just posted and Lynette talked about, so that the contract subcommittee can look at all the different ideas that you guys have and consider them and get them for review. So please do, we would love to hear any ideas that come from you guys. And then the next part is, of the 3 ideas that I just provided you, we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Sarah, is we're hoping to get you to help us prioritize a little bit. So if we're going to do a Zoom poll here real quick, and if you could please indicate which initiative you would recommend the contracts subcommittee work on next. So these are the 3 items we just talked about, and it's really just kind of picking what you think would be the most important for our future project. So go ahead, Sarah, thank you. I'll give just a minute for everybody to indicate out of those 3. there may be other ideas that come in, and we may come to you again in the next meeting about this, but at least to start with those three. All right. Okay, great. So it looks like model language for fundamental research justification requests was the highest ranked. So that is very helpful. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'll go ahead and close that, Sarah, or I may have extra in just a minute. Thank you. All right, so that wraps up kind of our updates. We just want to kind of touch base. And so please let us know if you have any questions. I don't know if Missy or Janet, if you see anything that we can address.
There was a question about whether or not contracts will have a separate session. And it looks like Missy has responded, but not at this time, but we will certainly prepare to do so for the next meeting.
Yeah, and I think, Jeanette, just to add to that, we're planning, in addition to the formal subcommittee meetings, to have a more open meeting once every other month or once a quarter. So if people are interested in joining those meetings, please feel free to send any of Katie, Jeanette, or I an email, and we'll get you on the meeting list so that we'll know when they are.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then Missy, while you're here, I think I saw, oh, you may have already, oh, you already answered it. Okay. So one of the questions was just to say quickly out loud was the target timeline for the troublesome clauses 2.0? And Missy did respond saying targeting for this summer, but hopefully go live by the end of the year. Let's hope. That's how developing goes. We'll see how it goes.
We're pushing on that. We're essentially queued up for a developer resource as soon as one becomes available. We're going to be pretty much ready to move. So I'm really hopeful that we'll have something up by the end of the calendar year.
Great.
And then I see Alex asked a question about CMMC being on hold indefinitely. Alex, there is CMMC 2.0. I think in terms of us needing certification, it's on hold. I don't know that that means that we're not going to see contract language related to it, particularly if we're doing control work.
We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so if anybody has more questions or if you guys want to elaborate on anything, feel free.
Sure. I say, Denise, you have it.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Katie.
Okay, question I just saw pop up is whether the troublesome clauses database will be available to both members and non-members. And that is currently the idea. And having different permissions associated for members versus non-members is in play.
Yeah, and I think to elaborate that on just a little bit on that, Katie, we're kind of the next piece we're tackling is what kind of reporting out of this database there should be. So kind of one of the thoughts is non-members could go in and look at clauses and maybe see how people responded or managed. But members may be able to get more detailed reporting out in more interesting and useful ways around that. So that's a more to come. But there is a hierarchy for institutions to establish who can enter clauses into the database and essentially be the institutional curator of the institutional information in there. And Alice has her hand up.
Well, I saw a comment in the chat from a fellow faculty member who asked essentially, why is this important? And I wonder, since you guys are the experts on this and you've got some faculty in the room, can you explain why the troublesome clauses issue is so important? My own grants don't have that in them, but what is a troublesome clause and why is it important?
Yeah, so absolutely. So troublesome clauses more generally come with contracts than with grants. But what these are clauses that might go against your institutional policy or that might be very difficult for you to comply with. They may impose publication restrictions, which for faculty are an issue. They may include data ownership issues, which again, for faculty become a very large issue. And your pre-award offices spend a lot of their time negotiating these on these issues over and over and over again on a contract by contract basis. To do that, the contractors have to be facile and creative, and they also need to know what's worked in the past for other people. So that's one of the reasons that this database is important. It gives us a community resource to see what's worked for other institutions and what has not. Another reason that this database is important is that often through FDP or through the Council on Governmental Relations or others, the government will ask for, hey, can we have institutional data on how often this is a problem for institutions around a particular contracting clause. And with a database that's well maintained and well curated and kept up to date, we're very easily able to access that data and engage with our federal partners for solutions that make contracting go more smoothly for everyone.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, and if you do have additional questions, you're welcome to contact us. If you go to the next slide, Sarah, our email addresses are all on the contact info page, and so don't hesitate. And again, just real quick, that thought exchange, if you have additional initiatives or thoughts, we'd love to get them. So if we go ahead and go to the next slide, and I believe Denise is going to take over for the expanded clearinghouse committee.
Thank you so much. And I want to say good morning to everyone. Where I am, it is about a high of 6 degrees. So I'm hoping it's a little bit warmer where you all are. And I'm here today with Robert Prentice from Yale University. We are 2 of the subcommittee co-chairs, along with Amanda Haymaker from Purdue University. And in the description, we said we wanted this to be very interactive. So I encourage anyone, we're going to be monitoring chat throughout the next 30 minutes. We also have a series of Zoom polls, but we also want to encourage anyone, if you want to share anything in the chat, ask questions, or raise your hand, we're also going to open up to discussion. So please just stop us anytime as Lynette said, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So though I'm keeping these coasters from your lunch hours, so it's a fine balance here. So on the next slide, we have a list of our subcommittee members. And I just want to thank everybody. We're very, very active throughout the year. We meet every other week. And I want to do a special shout out to Chris Renner from Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Chris is instrumental in the development side of the clearinghouse. And so we pester him all the time to test things and make updates for us. So we really appreciate Chris and all his expertise. And I also want to recognize our profile editor, our profile review team. That is led by Robert Prentice, but it also includes Jennifer Rodas from University of Wisconsin-Madison, Carrie McHugh from the Research Foundation for the State University of New York, and Webb Brightwell from Harvard University. So every time a clearinghouse institution submits any update, that's the team that reviews and they review for accuracy, and they also certify before it's published in clearinghouse. So they're fairly extensive. And they also field the help desk. So anytime you send something, at the bottom here, you see the systems help, EC help. So anytime an email is sent there, this is the team that actually answers all of your technical questions. And then we also have a general questions X clearinghouse. So the subcommittee has access to that email as well. So if you have any general questions, you can also write that general email address. We do keep our subcommittee website updated, and all of our contact information is there as well. So in the next slide, we wanted to provide just some brief updates. Many of you who are on the listserv have already seen these, but some of you may not be on our listserv. So just very similar to the compliance committee, we had to say farewell to Courtney Swaney. She left University of Texas, Austin at the end of the year. She went to Attain, so she stepped off as our co-chair. Courtney has been such a tremendous asset to the clearinghouse. She was involved with Lynette and Pamela Webb from the very, very beginning of the clearinghouse, from the pilot stage. She led all of the efforts in the clearinghouse over the many years. So it's a big loss to us, but we are very grateful that she's going to continue as a friend. And then we thank Robert Prentice for agreeing to step up and serve as a co-chair. So you're going to hear from him in just a few minutes. We also, one of the questions that I had asked the contracts committee about just now was whether their troublesome clause database would actually be accessible to non-FDP members. And I was really happy to hear that aspects of it would be. So the clearinghouse also is one of those areas of which we do open up to non-FDP members. We have over 90 non-FDP clearinghouse institutions who have profiles in our system. And every quarter we send out an invitation to our wait list. So if you go to the FDP homepage, you'll see a link to the expanded clearinghouse subcommittee page. And from that, you'll see a waitlist survey. So if you are attending today and you're not in the clearinghouse and you're not an FDP member, well, you're not an FDP member, if you would like to be on the wait list, we encourage you to submit your information to that survey link. Right now, we are only inviting those who are single audit entities, but I'll talk in a few minutes about how in the future we may consider non-single audit entities as well. So that, as I said, we have over 90 non-FDP clearinghouse participants. It's ongoing. We just closed Q1's invitation. We have 6 more institutions coming on board in the next couple of months, and then we'll just continue every quarter to send out invites. We also made some recent enhancements to the system. One of those was to be preemptive on incorporating the unique entity identifier. As many of you know, DUNS will be going away in April, so we wanted to go ahead and import UEIs for all of the institutions, and so we did that in the fall. And then just recently, we removed the primary auditee DUNS ID. This was only required if you were part of a large comprehensive audit. It was also a source of confusion for many of those institutions that were affected, and we realized it didn't really impact the review side and our ability to look at the single audit, so we removed that field altogether. And the next slide.
Hey, Denise.
Yes, Lynette.
While you're changing slides, could I just interrupt you? Hopefully not throw you off too much, but in the spirit of what comments have been and what we've been doing, could you stop for just a minute and explain the clearinghouse to some of the faculty that might be?
Oh, yes.
What is the clearinghouse? What does it do and how does it help the faculty?
Yes, thank you so
Denise.
much, Lynette. So, and my apologies for making a very poor assumption that folks are active in the clearinghouse. Recognize that many of you today may not be, and which is perfectly fine, but it is a database that the FTP supports, has created and developed. And if when you collaborate with a subrecipient, so if you are the prime recipient or the pass-through entity, and you are contemplating collaboration with the subaward institution, quite often in the past, prior to this pilot, the pilot started in 2016 for the expanded clearinghouse. It's been going on for many years, but prior to that, we used to send each other 2, 3, 4, 5-page subrecipient commitment forms that had entity information such as the EINs, the DUNS, our assurance numbers, our audit findings, a copy of our audit reports, and it just went pages and pages long. And we requested this of each other over and over and over again. So the pilot that Lynette and as well as Pamela Webb from University of Minnesota actually spearheaded was this idea that let's reduce all of this redundancy and request for information and that we're asking of each other in paper form, and let's create a database that we all have the information and access to the information on an ongoing basis. And it is reviewed, it is certified by the subcommittee. We verify it with governmental records and other areas where we can access the source information. And I'd say the pilot, I believe just in the pilot for the pilot participants, it resulted in, Lynette, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was over 18,000 hours of burden just for the pilot institutions that was saved from having an online database versus the paper forms.
That sounds about right.
So, and please continue to send more questions if in chat, and feel free to stop us.
And I put the link to the clearinghouse in the chat, Denise. So if anybody wants to take a peek at it, you can see it explains what it is. And if you click on participating organizations, you'll see that there are profiles for all of our participating institutions. So thank you, Denise, for doing that.
Thank you. Thanks, Lynette. This is the list of non-FTP cohorts. Again, we have over 90, and we just closed first invitation. We have 6. It was either 6 or 7 coming on board this first quarter. And the next slide. I just wanted to point out some of the collaborations that are ongoing. So one of the operational committees, the infrastructure committee systems working group, is a working group that is evaluating all of the FTP systems that are created. We have the clearinghouse. We're going to have the troublesome clause database. We have a conflict of interest database. We have the FTP membership institutional profile database, which has undergone a significant revamp over the last year. And one of the things that we're going to try to do, we get a lot of confusion on whether somebody is updating a record in the expanded clearinghouse profile versus the institutional member database. And they may update users or records in one and think that they're doing it in the other, vice versa, or the information when somebody leaves an institution, it doesn't get translated throughout the 2 different databases. So what we're trying to do is coordinate with the membership committee and perhaps consider a way to connect the 2 so that if you're making an update, that record is also reflected consistently in the other database. So we're not quite sure how that's going to happen, but we're hoping to keep evaluating that over the coming months. The other area, you can imagine, we just describing the expanded clearinghouse and the premise of it. We do coordinate closely with the subaward subcommittee that you're going to hear from this afternoon. They just formed a subrecipient monitoring working group who is evaluating financial risk assessment for non-single audit entities. And it's been a long-standing desire for the clearinghouse to consider how we might incorporate non-single audit entity information to further reduce that burden with those collaborations. So we're coordinating closely with them on that process to see if perhaps from their findings we can expand the clearinghouse to include this. And we're also working with the subaward subcommittee to put together a communications package that institutions can use to kind of communicate to their constituents at their universities, especially the large decentralized universities that have department administrators who are really involved in that subrecipient proposal preparation process to help them understand what it means to be part of the FDP and the tools that they can use. Or one of the areas is the use of subrecipient commitment forms, and Robert's going to talk about that in a minute. And then the final area of collaboration is the membership adherence working group. This is out of the membership committee. And what they're going to be looking at is the volunteerism and engagement of each of the FDP members. And since everybody is in the expanded clearinghouse as well and signs on to a participation agreement, we would just want to make sure that that membership adherence is aligned on both sides. So the next slide, we're going to spend the rest of our section on the next slide. We're just going to start out, Sarah. I think Sarah? Oh, there's a slight glitch. While we're waiting for Sarah to come up with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert. We're going to open this next section up. We have Zoom polls, but we do have some questions. Do we want to, Amanda or Robert, ask any questions while we're waiting?
That would be
Sorry,
good.
do you not see the slide, the next slide?
No.
No, I just see the main bar.
It's like really expanded the size.
I see a really a large close-up of the menu. But
You might need to stop sharing, Sarah.
Okay.
but I'll just keep while Sarah's bringing that up. I'm going to turn it over to Robert, but really hoping that many of you who are active users in the clearinghouse are willing to provide some feedback that may inform some enhancements and changes we're going to make to some of the questions too. So Robert,
yes,
turn
thank
it
you,
over
Denise.
to you during the technical fix.
So there are two aspects of the clearinghouse we'd like to discuss and then run some polls. First, we'd like to talk about the questions in the clearinghouse that are related to the single audit and some revisions we're considering to make them better for the purpose of subrecipient risk assessment. And then second, the use or really the misuse of subrecipient commitment forms and letters of intent, and then any other clearinghouse issues that you'd like to discuss. We've been
Robert.
Yes.
Sarah, do you want me to share?
Oh,
There you go. Looks like you're getting it here.
yes, slowly but surely.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Robert.
Okay, yeah, we've been getting feedback from individual organizations about the issues they've been encountering with single audit answers, subrecipient commitment forms, letters of intent, and that feedback has been very helpful. We're now in a forum where we can sort of gauge how those issues are affecting organizations more broadly. Before I get into the details, though, I'd like to step back and explain how they fit into the purpose of the clearinghouse and the history. So as Denise mentioned earlier, the primary purpose of the clearinghouse is to reduce the administrative burden associated with subawards by providing a central database of entity-level information so that subrecipient commitment forms do not need to be exchanged. Letters of intent can be used to convey project-specific data, but generally speaking, organizations should not insist upon the usage of their particular letter of intent when other organizations provide all of the information they need on their own form. Now that the clearinghouse has been up and running for several years now, there are two general things happening. One is we're continuing to work on that primary goal of burden reduction. We're adding more non-FDP member participants. The subrecipient monitoring working group is looking at how we might house profiles for non-single audit organizations. So we're continuing with that. And then we're also seeing new potential uses for the clearinghouse. As it was mentioned earlier, the infrastructure committee is looking at how data in the clearinghouse could be used to support other FTP activities, particularly among the operational committees. And then there are also organizations using the clearinghouse, not just for the initial issuance of the award, but for ongoing subrecipient risk assessment, and in particular, the annual single audit review. And they're paying very close attention to the data that we have on single audits and how they are represented in the clearinghouse. Now, the data elements that you see in the clearinghouse, there's about 100 associated with each profile. Those were born out of the questions that existed on the subrecipient commitment forms that were in use prior to the creation of the clearinghouse. There was a very detailed review done by Lynette and her team of, I believe, around 150 different forms. And so the clearinghouse came out of those questions that were existing on those forms. I think we're at the point where it's appropriate to take a fresh look at some of the questions and ask if they're working the way we need them to. And so if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. We've got a chart that shows some of the changes we're considering for these audit questions. And I know there's a lot here, but what I hope they represent is better information about the contents of a finding on an audit at the expense of less direct information about the severity of a finding. And before we go through each question, I want to say, out of all the data elements in the clearinghouse, the audit answers by far are the most difficult to keep up to date and to keep correct. The review team that Denise mentioned, they do very detailed reviews of these audits. And I would say rather more frequently than we would like, we have to return updates to those audit answers for corrections. So I think this is an area, even beyond the ideas shown here, where there is work to be done and improvements to be made. So right now, Clearinghouse asks about an organization's findings in general. And for the purpose of that question, a finding is a finding is a finding. That includes R&D findings, student financial assistance findings, financial statement findings. And those findings outside of the R&D cluster are not typically relevant in assessing risk. We have a kind of a common practice for organizations that have findings, say, only in the student financial assistance cluster, to make comments on their profile to indicate that the findings were not related to R&D. So that's kind of a manual workaround for that issue, and it's really not the best solution. And so the proposal here is just to report findings that are in the R&D cluster, those alone. We would remove the questions related to the severity of the finding. Are they significant deficiencies? Are they material weaknesses? And then we would change the language related to the pass-through funding question to reflect the updated language in the regulations. The requirements for pass-through entities, 200-332, formerly 200-331, our old favorite. And so I think with this revision, there would be a very small number of yes answers. It would be maybe even none most of the time. And lastly, if an organization does have findings in the R&D cluster, they would be asked to provide the page number of the audit PDF where the details about those entities' findings first appear, so that an understanding of the contents of the finding as well as the severity can be gotten to quickly. And to give you a general sense of what the numbers would look like with this change, right now somewhere between 35 and 40% of clearinghouse organizations report that they have a finding in their single audit. If we move to this model where we just report R&D findings, that would drop to about 20 to 25%. And so it would be, I think, a little bit less information that organizations were being required to provide, but better information when there are findings. Okay, I know that's a lot of information. Let's move to the next slide, please. And if we
do you want to launch your poll?
Let's go ahead and do that. Yes, thank you, Sarah. What we'd like to, and just as a very first impression of these changes, I realize that these are complex. You may need to think about these, talk about them, and get back to us later. But on the whole, do you think these proposed changes would be an improvement? Yes, no, maybe, or we don't use the clearinghouse for risk assessment purposes. I see some comments in the chat that are encouraging. My own experience is that there are occasionally financial statement findings that are serious enough to take notice of. But in every instance I've encountered those, there are also R&D federal award findings that are serious as well. Okay. So about 3/4 saying yes, none saying no, 20% saying maybe, and 3% saying not applicable. Thank you. That is very helpful information. Okay, we have a second poll that is related. And we'd like to know, in general, how frequently does your organization use the clearinghouse for this task of audit review? I know there are some very large organizations, my own among them. We interact directly with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse for this task. And I should mention, one data element that we possess that we don't have on profiles, but I'd be curious to know if anybody uses it, is the 6-digit database key that the Federal Audit Clearinghouse has for each audit entity. I think data access to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse is something, if we could get some improvements in that area, they would have a tremendously positive impact on this section of the clearinghouse. Okay. How frequently do you use the clearinghouse for this task? Whenever possible, sometimes, very rarely, or never. So one question I see in the chat box from Christina Stanger is any need to differentiate our entity if we're in a consolidated audit via questions in the clearinghouse? Generally, yes. If you are part of a large system, say if you are the University of Texas at Austin and are audited as part of the state of Texas, you would respond with the audit answers for just the University of Texas at Austin, not for the state as a whole. We value that particular audit information that is not always easy to pull out of state and system audits that can sometimes be several hundred pages. Okay, interesting. Whenever possible, 69%, sometimes 20%, very rarely 4%, and never 7%. That is very helpful to know. Thank you. Another question I see from Catherine Gonzalez is, could we add a versioning date to the information so it is clear when the comments or payment address changed? Right now, we don't store, I don't believe we have any field that is versioned like that.
No, we just right now publicly post the last profile updated date. On the back end, we do, on the administrative side, we can see version history for every field, but it would be quite extensive.
Okay, another question, I apologize for missing this earlier. Jean Mercer asks, can we also have a large enough comment field to add clarification statements if needed in addition to the page number references? I think we have a, I can't remember if there's a comment limit right now.
Yeah, I haven't encountered a comment limit, so I had responded to Jean to just say we would keep the comments. I don't think we've run out of room. I haven't heard that feedback yet. The page numbers would just be forced to include the page numbers for the reason Robert was stating. When we have several an audit that is several hundred pages, it's quite tedious to find the actual findings for your particular institution or campus.
Okay, and one more recent question from Marie Stuman is, our organization has not had a chance to understand how the expanded clearinghouse benefits us, since we don't get asked to use it by other organizations and still have to provide all of the documents that are posted in the expanded clearinghouse. Presuming your organization is in the clearinghouse, that's a real problem, and that is related to our next poll. So we'd like to talk about that. And let's go ahead and run that next poll related to subrecipient commitment forms and letters of intent. And then Nina Crow, I will answer your question. So if you're a participating organization in the clearinghouse, regardless of FTP member status, you should not be asked to fill out subrecipient commitment forms, and other organizations should not generally ask you to fill out their own particular letters of intent when your own letters of intent have all of the necessary information. So very broadly speaking, how often are these issues coming up? How often do you get asked to do something that you should not do? One thing I'll mention to speak to Marie's question about providing documents that are in the clearinghouse is, we realized very early on that because we often work for very large organizations and it's communication within organizations is sometimes a challenge, that it would come up that organizations would ask for subrecipient commitment forms, and that members of the clearinghouse would need to push back. And so we provide some sample pushback language on the clearinghouse. If that's not working, then we would like to know about that. Okay, so it often happens 19% of the time, sometimes 44%, rarely 32%, and never 5%. Ideally, we would like never to be 100%. So this is very useful information. Thank you. We may need to talk about this further on our listserv.
Can I chime in just briefly on that? We do often get questions that you'll get a copy of these slides. We have the general email address. If you do get asked to that, we are actually reaching out to those institutions to kind of get a little bit of an idea of the premise behind it. What we have found are that some institutions haven't communicated to the departments, or the department administrator wasn't aware that they shouldn't have to ask that, which is the reason we're trying to put out a collective communication with the subboard subcommittee. But also we're trying to get a sense, are there some common fields that are being requested that perhaps we could consider putting it into the clearinghouse. So the information is very useful for us. But feel free to reach out anytime.
Okay, Mark Sweet noted that some institutions insist upon updated data because of the accounts payable vendor systems. I've gotten some feedback along those lines as well. And Lisa Mosley notes that Yale University is one of the organizations that recently updated our processes and forms to make it clearer that we will accept other organizations' LOIs. So thank you for your understanding. Okay, to get back to Nina Crow's comment, she asks, is there a way to ensure that the most recent audit information is listed in the FTP clearinghouse? Sometimes the clearinghouse does not show the most recent audit. This has been a challenge from the beginning of the clearinghouse. It's something we have been talking about and discussing approaches for a long time. Ultimately, the best solutions are systems-oriented and data-oriented. And I think we're at the point where we can have automated reminders implemented, probably sometime soon, because we have better data access into the Federal Audit Clearinghouse and better visibility as to when an audit has actually posted. This year, as you may know, audits posted late all over the place. And so it was a real challenge to understand when an audit was ready to be updated, for us at least, in the clearinghouse and to send out those reminders. So I think we will have more news on that front, and that is definitely a concern. Okay, any other thoughts on these subjects or any other clearinghouse subjects? And if you'd like to raise your hand and speak, please feel free.
Comments have been really nice. Actually, it's really good feedback. I'd like to get a sense just for logistics. We had a, oh, and then we'll go to Laurie. Do folks feel that a similar survey going out to the listserv would be helpful informing before we roll out the audit question changes? I recognize that not everybody impacted is on this, is in this Zoom session right now. And you can put that in chat. Yeah, Catherine, thanks. So I'll turn it over to Laurie. Raise your hand.
Does she need to be unmuted?
I think she can unmute herself. Laurie, can Laurie unmute herself?
She
Sarah?
is unmuted. Lori, if you're having any trouble with your audio, please message me or Moises.
She must not be there.
She just messaged me. Oh yeah.
She says she's unmuted. We're not hearing you, Laurie. I don't know if you want to.
Laurie, if you want to message me your phone number, I can call you in so you can talk through your phone if you want to.
While Sarah's calling Laurie, Lisa Owen added a comment adding the audit MDL start date available on the audit clearinghouse site would be useful. Be considered.
Hello?
Hello, we hear you. This is Lori.
Sorry about this. My computer is on my webinar is unmuted. I don't know what's happened.
We hear you now.
Okay, so I'm with the Ohio State University, and we do use letters of intent, and we usually try and ask the other institution to use our form. The frustration we've had is that their letters of intent don't provide all the information we need. They're often a letter on letterhead that contains maybe the title, the PI, maybe dates, and maybe a budget amount, but not all the information that we need for the proposal. And we have to go back to the institution and play 20 questions and exchange several rounds of emails to get the information that we need for that proposal. In other words, not institution information, but proposal related information. And it's just easier if we ask them to fill out our form, which we are very, very careful not to ask another FDP institution for any institutional information. So our form is actually a page and a half for FDP institutions. I just wanted to chime in that sometimes asking for our own form literally does save time over exchanging several rounds of emails.
Sarah, Laurie, that's really helpful. And we do have a sample letter of intent on the FDP clearinghouse site, which we tweaked just recently to add the UEI field. But if there's anything, that's always an option for those who are attending this, to make sure that all of the elements in our sample are reflected in your letter of intent. So we can put out some communication to that effect to just remind everyone.
Thank you.
Is that it for questions?
I had one direct is there's a wish that the person actually doing the profile editor process in the profile in the clearinghouse be able to certify rather than requiring the profile editor and then the certifier rules. There are different ways, we have done that to bypass certification for user changes, but we felt that I think the feeling is that whomever is certifying, it can be the same role. For some institutions, it's the same. It's nice if you have multiple users because if one person leaves, then you don't have anybody playing any role. But if the certifier secondary can be the same as the profile editor. So it is essentially one stop, but many institutions prefer to have somebody certifying secondary to the editor.
Looks like we might need to start a conversation again about the LOI template.
Yeah.
These comments are very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Just the fact that there are so many questions reminds us that we need to put out more communication, hence the collaboration with Civil War Subcommittee. So thank you.
All right. Are we about wrapped up on clearinghouse? Did you guys have any more slides?
Nope, that's it.
All right, well, let's move. Thanks, Denise and Robert and Amanda. Just moving on to wrapping up our session. And we will definitely save this chat. So it's a tremendous amount of great comments and questions that we can make sure we address. I will say that we have there were 2 participants in the thought exchange. Oh, hold on, let me. There I am. 2 participants in the thought exchange, but no thoughts. So we will send a follow-up email to all the attendees today and kind of reiterate what we're hoping to hear in the thought exchange, the few things we talked about, just anything we're not working on within the research admin committee that you think should be considered, ways to engage faculty more. We got a lot of information on that. Oh, let me look again at the thought exchange. Melissa's saying she sees more. And what was the other one? Faculty and I think the contracts committee put out a question. So we'll follow up with all those questions. Yeah, I must be seeing something. Maybe I need to like go back in to the thought exchange here. Hold on.
I'm just
Yeah.
gonna pull up here the QR codes so anyone can quickly just.
And then do you have the exchange open? For some reason, it's just showing 2 participants on mine.
That's on mine. It says 72 with 36 thoughts and 549 ratings.
You want to pull up the dashboard if you can?
Yes.
And share. I just want to show everybody a little, so we have a couple of minutes here. And we can look, it'll be a surprise to all of us. We can look and see what the top thoughts were.
Do you want the dashboard or is this fine right here?
I'm not seeing anything. I'm still seeing slides.
Well, okay.
Now I see me. A big
Okay.
giant me.
Do you see it now?
There we go. Yeah. Okay. There was a lot. I don't know why I'm seeing it. Ooh, look at all those thoughts we're getting. Can you scroll down just a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you guys. We'll go through those. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing them on mine. We'll go through those, and what we can do with Thought Exchange now is theme them and kind of see what we're seeing and put them into categories or themes. And we'll include that in our follow-up and see if people have additional thoughts on top of that. One main thing I'm really taking away from this session is we need to do a much better job in engaging our faculty and making sure that what we're speaking to is clear to faculty. So we will definitely take that away as something we can work on throughout FDP actually. And now you just want to, oh, that one I'm seeing here, very mindful deliberations on what should be a just in time and what a proposal. The proposal initiatives group in their different discussions and thought exchanges and working with faculty last year, this is the area, and Amanda, Lisa, or Stephanie Gray, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the area that's coming out as a priority area from all the initial assessments. So hopefully we can have a session in May specifically on the proposal initiative and where we are with some of our conversations with agencies. This is great, everyone. So what we'll do too is there's a way to send a report of this, and I will send that out to all the attendees, and you can just scroll through the top questions, and again, we'll put themes in there and everything. Thanks, Sarah. Do you want to go back to the slides just real quick and we'll do final wrap up?
Sounds good. Give me a second.
Thanks, Sarah. And if anybody has any final questions, go ahead and raise your hand on anything we've talked about or the research admin committee and scope in general. They're doing that. All I really wanted to do is we have a slide I wanted to show again, everybody in the research admin committee. And as you can tell from those speaking today, we have a fantastic committee, including those that didn't speak today. And I just really want to thank them for all of their work. And thanks Sarah and David and Moises today for our session support. And if there are those of you that haven't heard about David Wright leaving us soon, I'm sorry if I'm the one announcing that to you, but I just want to take the opportunity myself to acknowledge David and thank him for his 15 years, I think it was last week, his 15 years of work with us and putting up with us and supporting us and being there for us. So I wanted to acknowledge David.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think unless anybody, I can't see people's hands. So unless anybody has questions, does somebody else see any hands up?